I'm so excited to see all of you here. Some of you are familiar to me, and I hope by the end we will be friends if I don't already know you. And so I am excited about this topic because number one, I think we have a great, powerful panel, but also as a TCK and as someone who went to international schools, and particularly I went to international schools in Africa, I get really excited to see educators who I wished were in the schools I were in who look like me, especially in the region that I was in. And so I am so pumped about this. And so what I want to do is I don't want to take away their shine because nobody can tell your story the way you can. And so I'm going to ask our panelists today, and I'm going to start with Dion to tell us, to introduce herself and tell us where she's located, as well as what she's currently doing now. What is her role?
Hi, everyone. Good day, whatever time it is where you are. I am in Hong Kong. This is now my 10th academic year in Hong Kong. My current role is as a vice principal in a secondary school here.
Thank you, Dion. Chandra, I want to turn it over to you.
Hi, I'm Chandra. I'm located in India, specifically Mumbai, and I am in my 4th year here in Mumbai, and I'm a middle school humanities teacher, literacy and social studies.
Social studies was my favorite subject, so extra kudos and love to you. And Dominique, please introduce yourself.
Absolutely. Greetings to everyone near and far. I'm Dominique Blue. I am originally from Memphis, Tennessee. I am the grade 6 learning support teacher at the International School of Beijing. This is my 5th year here in China, and I've held other roles such as middle school dean and learning support coordinator. Special education is my background. It is my love and passion.
All right, so we're going to go ahead and jump in. And I know that it always helps to have a little bit of context. So I'm going to throw this question out to the panel, and then whoever wants to start first. But I hope that all of you will answer. That's what I'm hoping will happen. So for each of you, can you share a little bit of your journey? So how did you enter international education?
I'll start if that's okay.
That's fine.
I kind of fell into it. So I was born and raised in Barbados, and I moved to the States for undergrad. So in the States is where I trained to be a teacher. So in some ways, I guess I started international, starting in public schools in the States. And then at some stage, I think I went home to Barbados for Christmas and just never left. Like there was just something calling me back home. Because I found a job in the newspaper for the international school in Barbados. And at that point, I had no idea about the IB or even the whole concept of international schools. It was just a job at a time where I was looking for something else. So I started teaching abroad, really, for me, in public schools in the States, and then moved back home for a job in the international school there. Once I realized what was going on in this world of international schools and what the IB was, and I was like, oh, so you mean like now I can go teach anywhere in the world with this thing? So it was like a whole new world just opened up. And that was really, really exciting to just start looking at all the other places that this experience with the IB curriculum could take me. So I spent 3 years at that school in Barbados and then moved out here to Hong Kong.
I guess I'll go ahead and go next. For me, journey was a bit more straightforward. So in 2015, my husband and I were both working at schools in the US that unfortunately were on the chopping block because the school district was doing some reorganizing, I guess we'll say. And even though like we were reassured that, you know, if our school is closed, we'll have a job, we used that as a chance to really explore all of our opportunities. And so I had always been interested in teaching abroad And fortunately, my husband was, he was okay with that. He was on board. And so we ended up registering with ISS because they had a fair that was near to us, being from Tennessee. So we had plans to attend the Atlanta fair. And I think ISS pretty much has the only recruitment fair in the South, right? Being in Atlanta. Fortunately for us, Dr. Wallace team, who was the then head of School of American International School of Abuja, Nigeria, he was very keen to pick us up before we went to that ISS fair in January. So that's how my journey began. A little bit straightforward, but yeah.
Hi, so I'm from Kentucky in the United States, and I taught for 10 years in American public schools and working in places where, frankly, I got burnt out. And I left teaching for a year, and I was doing corporate teaching, corporate training, which is like teaching. But I was doing corporate training for a year, and I was sitting in a cubicle one day, and I had nothing to do, and I was thinking about that I had wanted to go abroad and to live abroad. I remembered that particular dream. And I had a professor when I was in a university who mentioned in passing that she had worked abroad. And so that planted a seed, and I talked to her about it a little bit later. And I just said, you know what, that's something I'll do later when I'm ready. So my family was not enthused about me going abroad. So it took me some time to work up the courage to even apply, but I was sitting in that cubicle and I was like, I'm in my 30s now, I think I can do it. And so I found my job online. Actually, I didn't know anything about how to do this process. I had a friend who was recruited to work in AIELOC. They were doing this big push at that time to get teachers, particularly who were from the United States and in inner city schools, to work for them. And so my friend called me. I remember I was in California at the time, and she said, it's time to go abroad. Let's do it. And I was like, all right, let's do it. And so I made an account in Thai online because that's all I knew at the time. And I found my first job in Beijing online. I've not gone to a fair. So I hope to have that experience soon.
And Chandra, I think you touched on something which was actually leading into my next question. And this is for all of you, but I would love to hear a little bit more about this because of something you said. So I was going to ask you, what did your preparation look like personally and professionally? Because there are some individuals here who might be thinking about going abroad. But what I really like is that you actually touched on your family wasn't enthused. Can you talk a little bit about what that dynamic looked like, especially for those who might be thinking or continuing on abroad?
Yeah, so my family is from Kentucky. We're located in the South, and no one lives too far from our base in Kentucky. And for generations, that's where we've been. So when I said that I wanted to move abroad, it was met with a lot of questions like, why do you want to go there? Are there even Black people where you're going? Because my first job was China. And they were like, are there even Black people in China? What are you going to do if you get sick? Who's going to take care of you? We can't come to see you. So it was a mind shift for them to get used to the idea that I would take a job so far away. And that took a lot of conversations. And it took my mother actually coming to visit me in China for her to get it, to say, okay, this isn't like the wild, wild west that I was thinking of. So, and that's still, and to be honest, that's still a conversation, every time I come home, someone is asking me, when am I coming back? And I've been away now for about 10 years.
And I can definitely see some head nods because I feel like there are definitely folks in the room who have had that experience. And I'm curious from you, from Dion or Dominique, if there's anything similar, or how was the reaction to you choosing to go international with your career?
I guess I can go ahead and go. For me, I've always marched to the beat of my own drum. And so my family they're used to that at this point. And so when I decided that this is something that I wanted to do, I think for them, they knew they needed to prepare themselves emotionally for what that would look like because it was going to happen. And so, of course, having a child, like it's always, when can I see my grandbaby? And it's like, we'll come back, we'll visit during the summers, because, trying to do that during Christmas holiday or any other break to travel back home would not work. And so, everyone adjusted. I think the people who took it the hardest initially was just like the job. They did not believe that we were actually going to leave, until we left. And so I think they had the toughest adjustment, but like for family, they knew that, hey, if that's what she wants to do, she's going to do it. And I'm a pretty responsible person, so they know that I'm going to make sure that I've researched, that I plan, and that I'm prepared, and that, things will be okay.
Dion, did you have something to add? I can see you.
Yeah, I'm like, unmute. It's just like sticking. I think I had probably a very different experience in terms of my family's attitudes and perspectives. Like Barbados is a very, very tiny place. So the prospect of going abroad was very, very kind of normal. And as a young child, like I remember my dad traveled a lot for his job. So my first thoughts of China, Singapore, Vietnam was actually from stories from my dad when he'd come back from work trips. And then going abroad for university, not that everybody does it, but relatively common. And I have a lot of family in the US, a lot of family in the UK. So the idea that I was going to move abroad again was not really, that part was pretty blasé. It's when I said, and the jobs in Hong Kong, that was kind of when people's minds exploded a bit. And that's where there was lots of questions like what Chandra was talking about, are there Black people there? How is that going to work out? And I remember a kind of family gathering around the time that I got the job that turned into me being on the spot, giving the full rundown about Hong Kong. It helped that I'd found an apartment building called Caribbean Coast, which was funny that was the first place I lived in Hong Kong was called Caribbean Coast. Everybody thought that was, hilarious. So being able to actually show pictures of what it looked like and talk about the culture here, the fact that English actually is very, very widely spoken in Hong Kong, kind of demystified things for my family. But the idea of me being gone was pretty of course she's going to be gone again. It was the location that was a little bit more of a shock initially.
So I'm curious, because all of you have been in education for a while and have been in international education for a while. How at this point in your career do you evaluate sort of the next assignment, or have you evaluated to end up at the schools you're at, right? Because all of you have a Black female identity, right? And having been an educator, having spoken to educators, especially in this space, that's something you don't turn off. And you have other identities, but that's probably your most visible identity. So how have you been able to identify maybe environments that have been supportive or will be supportive in the application process? And then the second half to that, and I can ask it again because I know this is a lot, is what does it look like, bringing your full self to work once you are there?
Amanda, straight to the core with these questions. I've thought about this quite a lot, because I feel like at this point in my career, it's less of the, these jobs are amazing and wonderful, and would I be so lucky to work in these places? And it's very much been a shift for me in recent years in terms of where are the spaces that are going to value me, because I now have a much clearer sense of my own value and my worth professionally. So what is the space that's deserving of me, as opposed to 10, 11 years ago, where it was just anywhere will do, because just the excitement of going to a new place is enough. Now that's nowhere near enough for me anymore. So in terms of the things that I look for, I've stayed in Hong Kong now 10 years. I'm now at my second school in Hong Kong. And when I left my first school, it was very much like, I don't care where I go, anywhere but here. Because there were a lot of things that shifted in the time that I was there, where I felt undervalued. There were a lot of things that did come up in terms of identity for me that took the shine off of the international part of it. So I think I went into it somewhat naive in thinking international is going to mean, you know, broad and diverse and welcoming and, you know, yeah, global citizenship and all these cultures are going to mix and mingle. And isn't that going to be fantastic? And there is some of that, but there's also real underside to things. So I had reached a point where it was time for me to think more selfishly, I guess, and to not just take what felt like crumbs being handed out and was like, look, I know that I'm good at what I do. I felt like there was a glass ceiling at that school. I looked up at leadership and it was all white men on the senior leadership team. Then there was one woman, but also a woman who didn't have any family or anything, and she was like hardcore 250% just work. So it was difficult not seeing any representation. I kept being blocked for things, and so I knew that I needed to move on. So in the space that I'm in now, I found it a lot more welcoming for a number of reasons. It was a school that was run by a woman who was very forward thinking. And even just the types of questions that I was being asked in the interview gave me a better sense of what that environment was going to be. And I also went in armed with questions that I had about the context. So again, like at this point in terms of interviews, it's not just about, can I be the shiny thing that they are looking for? It's, wait, hang on, I'm interviewing you too. Are you going to be giving me what I need? And I'm more than happy to say no or turn opportunities down if I'm not getting the right vibe.
Thank you for being transparent, by the way, because it's not always the easiest to kind of talk about sort of the hard stuff. So I really appreciate that. And I'm sure the audience as well. Dominique and Chandra, any thoughts?
I'll go. So I echo Dion in that it's important to have your own standards for what you're looking for. My first international teaching job, I entered the international teaching game. At that point, I had 10 years of teaching experience in the United States. And a lot of those skills are most of those skills are transferable. However, as I went into the international market, I learned progressively what I was looking for and what I was not looking for. So my first school, I went in completely blind, and there were a lot of great things about working there, but I learned a little bit more about what I needed to be a teacher working and living abroad. And then my second school, things meant more. So at this point, I'm at my third school. I think that I'm pretty clear about what I need in order to be happy professionally. So I look at the location. Is this a place that I could see myself living and having a life outside of work? Because work-life balance is important to me. I look at within the school, is there opportunities for me to grow professionally in the ways that I want to grow professionally? I look at money. I have financial goals that I have for myself. And so I pay attention to, is this going to help me further, move further along in the direction that I want to go financially? So I have a rubric, and I echo Dion, I go to a school with questions. So I think it's important that when you're interviewing, you have thought about, what is it like for me to be at this school, and ask questions accordingly.
Yeah, so I echo both of that as well. For me, I'm in a space, honestly, where I feel kind of like jaded with the whole institution. Because I've realized, and I think I've held this a while, is that there are many institutions that are simply just not true to what they say on paper. And it's like, you know, why go through the charades? And so at this point where I'm at now, it's like I'm looking for location. I'm looking for money as well, and not so much focusing on the school. And so as you mentioned, that interviewing going two ways, so they can really know who they are getting in me and how I move with space. Because I can adapt to most environments pretty well, and so that's not a big concern for me. But what is a big concern for me is how others are treated within an institution, because that has really a large impact on me and my advocacy. Because like if I see something that's not right, I'm going to speak out. And sometimes you just want to chill, but if you're at an institution where you have to be on, because the ancestors are calling you, like if you see something, you have to say something. And if that involves getting into a lot of good trouble, that makes that experience a bit different. And so just like that two-way interviewing, so they can know that this is who I am. I'm pretty open about it. You can do a Google search like I am who I am. Is that something that you can honestly accept because you have, done the work with yourself and with your institution to really know who and what you are about? Because at this point, it's not even about like a fit, because if institutions are being true to what they say on paper, all schools should be a good fit, right? Because we say that our students are meant to belong in these institutions. And so if we have that type of environment for students, it stands to reason that we would have that type of environment for adults, right? So there should not be an institution where any adult doesn't fit, right? And so yes, the two-way interviewing, and I'm looking now just for location and money and just trying to chill and relax and thrive professionally.
So, because I like to stir the pot and you guys are on the same vibe. So for our audience, I'd be curious, real talk, what are the questions you're asking administrators in schools when you're interviewing to get the information you need? So what are the types of questions you are asking to evaluate a school?
Well, one that I asked recently was, can you speak to me about the retention of your BIPOC teachers? And baby couldn't even answer the question. And he was like, okay, this has been a great interview. I'll talk to you all later.
All right, off the bat, she's starting fires. What other questions are you guys asking schools?
Well, that's brilliant, Dominique. Let's see. One question that I asked was actually, it was about student agency. And I'm thinking too about what Dominique is saying in terms of how schools project themselves versus how things really are in the school culture. And the school was saying a lot about the prominence of student leadership and agency. And I felt that if it's really going to be an equitable space, then student leadership and agency isn't just, oh, look at, our student leaders running the social or whatever, but that it would also be part of what's happening in the curriculum and policies and how the school is being run. So that was one question that I had was around, well, how does that leadership play out in the teaching and learning space? How does that play out in curriculum design and all of that? And it was one that made them rock back. They didn't quite have the answer for it, but what they did have, though, was a real openness to hearing more about what my thoughts were about that and what it could look like. So it was like, okay, nowhere's going to be perfect, but at least they're open to exploring this more. Another interview that I had recently, I wasn't interviewing for schools, but it was something academic related, where I was being invited to chair a research group. And it started out with me kind of being hunted supposedly for all these really valuable skills and research or whatever. But when I asked, well, what are you going to be doing to prepare for and maintain my psychological safety in this space as a Black woman? Because you're saying that you want that diverse perspective. How are you planning for and preparing for my psychological safety? There was a lot of umming and ahhing, and eventually the opportunity was actually rescinded, where by the end of it, they were like, maybe you're not actually what we thought we were looking for. It's like, no, actually, you're racist. That's what this is. So yeah, that's a question that I'm now adding to my repertoire, is asking about psychological safety.
That's a great question. I think I'm going to add that to my rubric. That's a great question. I think that, so I usually ask for them to refer me to a person on their staff that I can talk to, right? And there are pluses and minuses with that, because usually they're going to point you to a person who will be a good spokesperson for their organization, someone who is going to sell you a dream, right? So, but I want to hear the dream that they're trying to sell from a different angle. And then normally, so I'm in contact with that person, but then also there's a Facebook group on Facebook. There's a group on Facebook, I think it's called Brothers and Sisters in International Schools. And that's an excellent resource, because I found that I can go to the search in that group and I can type in the name of the school or the country in which the school is located. And usually I can find somebody within that group who is employed at that school. And I usually send that person a private message, and I have a conversation with that person around that school. And I find that the people in that organization are very helpful, because it's people like us who are trying to look out for each other. We understand to connect to the psychological toll it can take to be a Black person in white spaces trying to navigate professionally, especially international schools, where so much of the working dynamic is the social stuff that happens outside of school. So I usually find a person in that site, like with the current school that I'm in, I found 2 people within that site, and they were able to talk to me about dynamics that happen underneath the surface and dynamics that happen that are for public consumption. And I compared and contrast those two stories, the story from the person the school referred me to, and the stories from the people that I found through that website. And I made a choice if this is something that I can deal with, because I don't expect to be in a place where I'm going to experience a utopia. I don't expect that there's going to be an absence of racism. The question for me is, how does racism show up in that place? And how it shows up, is that something that I'm willing to manage and navigate? And if it's not, then I make the choice that I don't want to work there.
So I'm pretty sure in this audience, we have some folks who are at least in admin roles, maybe in some leadership roles in schools and whatnot. And so I'm curious from the panel, if any of you could give an example or just give ways that in schools that you have worked with where there's been a supportive environment, what are the things that administrators or the school itself provided that made you feel supported in your role and in your identity?
In the school that I'm in currently, I've had interesting encounters being in leadership with teams that I'm leading, where I've gotten, trying to choose my words carefully. I mean, disrespect is the word that comes to mind, really, where people have responded to me in ways that really make me think, would you be saying that if I looked different? Would you be saying that if you were talking to a white male leader instead of a Black woman? Like, I just can't. There have been moments where it's like, I cannot believe the words that are coming out of this staff member's mouth. It's like, I am your vice principal. Who are you talking to like that? And in having to respond to situations like that, one thing that I've been really grateful for is that in every circumstance like that, I have had my principal's full support. So when I have spoken to her about encounters like that have come up, I haven't got the, oh, maybe that's not really what he meant, or, are you sure that that's what they were really saying? Maybe it was this. I haven't got that the absence of the validation. Like, she's always taken anything that I have shared with her or reported to her along those lines as 100% valid, that it happened 100% as I reported it, and completely backed me up that yes, that is an issue that needed to be addressed. Where I would say there's been, I guess, a little bit of a gap is that she's been good in giving me room to be like, and how do you want to tackle that one, Dion? And I'm like, this is what I said, this is what I'm doing, and this is what's happening. And again, there'll be that full support. But the gap really is that there's points where she really does need to step in and kind of take that issue from me. So there's that additional labor that I'm having to do sometimes of being able to analyze the racial undertones going on, provide the solution. And yes, I'm supported when I provide the solution. But as I think ahead to what I think, a really ideal environment would be, it would be working with the leadership team who are really, co-conspirators and abolitionists in the sense that they're going ahead of me and clearing some of the way so that I don't have to deal with some of the bullshit that I have to deal with sometimes.
For me, the support has been like hot and cold, depending on the school. And so that varies. Like, for example, at my current school, I do feel supported as a professional, supported by admin, but I can have like a conversation maybe with a colleague and to hear their experience with the admin as a BIPOC educator. It's completely different. So that does color how I, receive that support, that, hey, you're being supportive to me, but there's this other BIPOC individual and they're not receiving that same thing, so it shifts how I really view that support. And is it really authentic? Are you supporting me because you know that if you don't, that I won't be as quiet about not receiving the support that I feel like I should receive?
Echo Dominique that the support runs hot and cold depending on the school that you're in. And depending on the region, I think you're in the world and the perceptions, particular perceptions around Blackness that people have in that region. My current school environment, I would say that I feel relatively supported in terms of when I feel supported in that they're pushing me to enter leadership and supporting me in that way. And I think that I'm happy about that. And when I think about the other schools that I've worked in, that hasn't been the case. So it runs hot and cold. It runs hot and cold. And to be honest, sometimes I'm waiting for the rug, what's that phrase? The rug to fall, the bottom to fall out a little bit. Like, wait, is this really like, so, but right now I will say that in my current environment, I'm feeling supported and it's not perfect. There are definitely, again, I don't think any place is perfect, but yeah, perhaps I'm jaded. When I worked in the States, I didn't feel supported as a Black teacher there either. So I'm trying to imagine, have I ever worked in a place where I felt fully supported, right? And I don't think that the lack of support I feel as a Black educator is just in international school spaces. I think it's in school spaces. I didn't feel that as a student. So that's an interesting question. I don't know how to answer that. What does support look like? I don't know. But I do think that in my current environment, this is the closest I felt to being supported for sure. But that's a hard question.
Thank you for the transparency as well. I mean, and these questions aren't always meant to have a perfect answer. It's just to shine on y'all's humanity. And I think each one of you do that and have done that very well in your responses. I'm always mindful that the audience will have questions, and I want to at least make sure that we can acknowledge and at least answer that. And so I am going to open it up for questions for the next few minutes. And so if you have a question you would like to ask our panelist or a specific panelist, you can either come off a mute, because I think we're not so large that we can do this, or you could throw it into the chat, and I'm trying to monitor, and hopefully Kevin is monitoring it as well. So what questions do you have for our panelists? I see Fandy, go ahead, come off mute.
It's been really nice to hear that Dion, and you have been feel like you've been supported, and Chandra as well. So I just wanted to pick your brain up on, like, how did you manage to build that relationship with the people who were already there at school and they had perhaps the right conditions and circumstances to support you as a Black woman?
Well, two things I would say is that based on the question, I gave examples of when I have felt supported. Very much like Chandra said, it's not perfect. So there's still some gaps. But also, I think the scenario that I'm in now has a lot to do with luck, more so than anything else. Because I moved from an environment where I was very unsupported. So like when I left my previous school, and first I moved into a role as head of middle school, that principal was not shy in letting me know how surprised and shocked he was that I had been successful in getting that role. And that was because of a lot of BS. And it was only then that I realized that he had actually been blocking other opportunities that I had applied for. And it just so happened to be that this principal at the school that I was moving to was married to someone who I had worked with very, very closely. And so she had that wider context to be able to give my former principals, feedback a lot less weight than another person who didn't know me at all. So really in the end, like, it kind of came down to who I knew, helping to remove that barrier so that I had the opportunity to demonstrate who I was and what I could do through the interview process. So I'm always very mindful that, yes, and I have friends who say too that I never give myself enough credit for being good at my job. So yes, being good at my job helps, but in terms of getting support and being in this environment, like, some of it I think came down to luck, actually.
Wow. If you want to slip a name my way, I got people's, we know this. Anyway, Yolanda, you up next.
Hello, everyone. Mine is more of a comment. This is my first experience in international school setting on my first contract, my second year of my first contract. I am a career educator of 25 years. Worked for Department of Defense schools for 11 years. I was a school administrator, assistant principal for 7 years. I hold 2 advanced degrees, including a terminal degree in educational leadership. And I noticed that when I was first applying for leadership roles, I didn't know about the international arena and the racism and the sexism and all of that. But I soon found out, because I was applying, didn't even get not one interview. I have excellent ratings from all of my other positions. And then I said, well, I really do want to go overseas though. So let me just put in for a teaching position. And people were beating my door down then. And I'm like, oh, I see what's going on now. I can be a teacher, but I can't be a leader at these international schools. And it's very disheartening.
I should probably feel to Dion, since she actually is a leader within the international, like a principal, but I'm a teacher. And I will say what I've noticed is there's a good old boy network within the international school space. And so many of the jobs in leadership are not about what you know. It's more about who you know. And do they imagine that within the context of their organizational structure, Are you going to come in and disrupt what they think is a good thing? Or are you going to come in and keep the train moving in the direction that they want it to go? And I think that for us, outside of that network, and so it is much harder for them to, well, it's much harder for us to access those positions. A lot of times, a position may be advertised, but there's already a person who that position is slated for, right? They're advertising it for the purposes of being fair, but they know who they want to give that position to. And so I would suggest that as you're moving through these waters, don't take anything personally, because none of it is a reflection on who you are as an educator and your value, your worth, and your skill set. It is, unfortunately, a lot of times it's a matter of who you know and how you make those people feel.
Toyin.
Hello, everyone.
And I wanted to,
oh,
Go ahead. Dominique, were you going to add to that point?
yes, I was just going to
Okay.
echo that point of it really is who you know, like even my current job that I had now, like just looking back, I realized that like I applied to like the recruitment channel and didn't hear anything back. And so I just took it upon myself. It's like, you know what, let me email to see, you know, if they still have jobs open, even though I know it's still open. And so I just so happened to have like the director of student support services like email because of some conference that I attended or presented at. So I had like that back channel connection. And it was through using that connection that I even, you know, got to interview. Like I applied to the proper channel and it was crickets. And so you really do have to kind of use that networking. And with international schools, I mean, to be perfectly honest, it is a bit like elitist, right? So they want to like only talk to you if you work at certain types of schools. And so that's something to be mindful of as well for us as Black women.
Toyin.
hi, everyone. Thank you for contributing your time to this. So I recently got offered a job in Shenzhen, in an international school. So yay for that. However, I have been, I'm an overthinker, so I've literally been YouTubing how to be like, what is it like to be Black in China? And the general consensus is that people touch your hair randomly, loads of pictures, some people may run away from you, and stuff like that. Plus, I've heard that they don't really speak English. So I'm thinking, okay, do I have to go and take a language course before I arrive? Would I just be like, I don't know. So I think I'm having like a little panic buzz, because at first it was a case of, yay, I'm applying for jobs. And now I actually got the job. I'm like, okay, I'm moving in January and I'm not even mentally prepared for this thing. I have worked in an international school before in Nigeria, but that's where my parents are from. So I'm kind of used to the Nigerian way of things and how things work there. But in Asia, it's my first time going. So I just want to hear, like, is it as bad as I'm making it sound? Because you've been there for 10 years or like over 5 years. Just want to hear your experience of that. Yeah, thank you.
And I was going to say, Toyin, the chat is buzzing with people who've been in China. So they're all saying, reach out, reach out, reach out. But panelists, you got anything to add as well?
Yeah, I mean, Shenzhen is like just across the water. But I think for anybody who is in or has been in, even from the group, they might be able to give some more specifics. I mean, I think everything that you're listing is partly true, but there's also a whole bunch of other stuff, you know, that's part of the experience. That's amazing and wonderful. I mean, going over the border to Shenzhen, and I love Shenzhen. I am really suffering with this COVID border closure because I was in Shenzhen like on a monthly basis. I just loved it and loved so many things about being in Shenzhen. So I feel like there's kind of like a little bit of a tax that you pay, being just so different from what most people in Shenzhen might be encountering. But even saying that, in the time that I've been here in Hong Kong, I've seen that demographic also change tremendously. So ago, things that would have been like a complete apparition to some people, you know, it's becoming more and more familiar. So will there be difficult things to navigate? That's a yes, but I think there'll be also amazing things that will completely counterbalance that.
I was going to say there is a question or a comment in the chat for our panelists. I find that in international schools, Black people are not supportive of each other, especially when they are in administrative positions. I'm interested in hearing if anyone has had that experience.
I really haven't had a Black administrator, but I would say as an educator, I always try to be supportive of other Black folks. Like if you see me out there, like ask me questions, use me as a reference. I do not care because I leave that up to the school to do their background check. And so I try to be as supportive as I can of other Black people because I want to see us succeed and I want us to be in the building. And so like if there is any type of job, I'm always like, hey, come apply here, use my name. And so it just depends on the folks. I mean, we already know that all, you know, skin folk and kinfolk. And so it just really depends. So it can vary. But there are those of us out there who try to bend over backwards to see each other succeed and to be our sister's keeper.
I echo Dominique. I haven't had the experience of having Black administrators in international spaces. I did have one in one school, but she didn't continue the year. So, but working with her was a pleasurable experience. And I've had the experience of working with colleagues who are teachers, and I haven't experienced that. And I'm sorry that that person has.
So I kind of, as we're looking, you know, as we're looking at our time and kind of moving towards the end of the hour, one of the things I'm really interested in hearing from all of you is, what advice do you have for those who are navigating this experience, right? And I want to take it in two parts. So the first part is for those who are looking and are starting early in their career as a Black woman in international spaces. And then the second part is for our experienced educators, and what are the things that you would say that they should look out for or to do to feel supported? And that can be both professionally and personally, because wellness and well-being is important. So what are the things that you do? So let's do the first part, which is, what is the advice you have for those starting out in this field as Black women?
I'll go. So number one, starting out in the field, can I ask a clarifying question?
Absolutely.
When you say starting out in the field, do you mean education in general or international education?
International education.
I would suggest that you be very knowledgeable about whatever it is that you are supposed to teach, because the margin of error for us is not as big as other groups. And so to give a very real example, my first job internationally, when I was in China, I had parents who literally thought that I was going to hurt their child. And not because I don't know why they thought that specifically, but I can think about various stereotypes that they may have gathered through media. But it literally ended up in them having a conversation with me where they begged me not to hurt their child. And and that was during a parent-teacher orientation, my first week professionally in that location. And so the thing that helped me manage that situation with that much lack of support, I guess you will, at the very beginning, was the fact that I knew what I knew and no one could take that away from me, and that I was good at what I did. So it was my talent and my skill that pushed me through. That same parent by the end of the year was very complimentary and sharing that widely throughout the school. So we have to know, we have to be, can't be average, unfortunately.
Dion or Dominique, in the interest of time, what advice do you have for experienced educators? No, you're totally fine. That was on me.
Sorry.
That was on me, not on you.
Let me try and be quick. So I'm skipping past the newbie stuff then. I mean, I think this applies though for everybody, regardless of what point you're at. Both is to be open for opportunities that present themselves. I came into international teaching as a music teacher who then got given a drama class. And next thing you know, I'm a vice principal for guidance and well-being. So like my career has taken me on quite a journey. So I would say be open to opportunities as they present themselves, but also be wise. In Beijing, we have a saying where we say every skinty in a laugh, which means that every smile isn't really a smile. It might be a grimace. Every person who presents themselves as friendly initially is not. There are some undercurrents in the mix for us as Black women where we cannot take everything at face value. So you need to keep your wits about you. And I'd also say find a mentor and find community that goes beyond the school that you're working in, because there will always be politics that will prevent you from always being able to be transparent and open with people. If you can connect with somebody who's outside of your school, that gives you a safe space to be able to process what's going on and have a sounding board to help you navigate things.
Dominique, I'm going to give you the last word on advice.
I'm just going to keep this short. Just protect your peace in whatever way that looks like. You know, if you come in with it, you want to make sure that you leave with it. So protect your peace.
You know what? I think that's for all of us, right? We definitely need to protect our peace around these streets. So, ladies, thank you so much for your time and for your expertise and for your knowledge. I would imagine, Kevin, their contact information is available somewhere so that if those who are in the audience want to reach out to them further, they can. I am going to do a second plug for the AIELOC conference. Y'all, I've been to a lot of conferences. Even if the topics ain't got nothing to do with you, they are some of the most interesting things I've sat on in the past 2 years because I'm nosy and want to know what's going on with people. So November 12th and 13th, it's virtual. So if you haven't had a chance, visit the AIELOC website. And thank you to our audience, you guys, for giving your morning, afternoon, evening to come hang out with these lovely ladies. I hope it's been a blessing and a gift for each of you. All right. Thank you again.
Can I make a plug?
Yeah, go ahead, make your plug. I haven't hit the end yet.
I, along with some other teachers who are involved in AIELOC, we hold an affinity space for teachers of color once a month. I see Cheryl Ann in here. She and I collaborate with space. So please be on the lookout for that. We call it self-care. We are the self-care group and we are all about work-life balance.
That is awesome. Hey, Cheryl Ann. And she's been featured on my website, so she's amazing. And
Thank
Kevin
you.
says Cheryl Ann is hosting the advocacy circle in 30 minutes. So if you need a bathroom break or need to grab some food before that, I would encourage you to do so. But thank you again for joining us today.